Good morning, friends. Welcome to OBE Journal, WordofGord's OBE Journal 2017. Continuing on from yesterday. And that was an interesting little orb. Did you see that? At least it looked like one. Sort of came in and out just very briefly. Thank you. Could have been a reflection of, the sun coming in. It's hard to say, but we'll judge on the rewind. As we pursue these adventures, these curiosities, these expansions, we can encounter a saying that is often used by people in the metaphysical or New Age community, talking about activities and saying, well, it's either service to self or service to others. And I think people mostly mean the same, pretty much the same thing by that. And yeah, I think some would say, as a young soul, it's service to self. You're building yourself up, discovering who you are, who your potentials are, or what your potentials are, and pushing out to see where the limits are. If there are limits, of course, there always turned out to be limits somewhere or other, doesn't there? And the implication often is that we are selfish and fairly ruthless in our expansion of self and self's pride and grandeur and accomplishments. And this can go on in the realm of psychic abilities and esoteric understandings. You can acquire all this stuff and just use it for the greater glory of yourself. And it's often assumed that at a certain point you will stop that and reorient yourself to service to others. Selfless as opposed to selfish. Altruistic as opposed to selfish. And while I feel this is by and large true, there's certain stages or paths where it seems to me you're doing both simultaneously. And perhaps it's just a way of looking at it. There's a stage of seeing activity as service to self, second stage of service to others, and a third stage of it's both at the same time. And it depends how you put your focus and how you see it. And I would sort of add to that right now that there's a certain point where you can't really tell the difference, because both drives are parallel, simultaneous, equal, pushing ahead at the same time. And so is it an illusory distinction? I don't think so. I think it's good for souls at a certain level to make that shift and see that they can do things for others as opposed to just for themselves. But I seem to be at a stage, and I wonder if you are too, where you can't actually, the more you try to tell the difference, the less you're able to tell the difference. No matter whether you're doing tripping around, having fun, as it were, out of body, we've discussed that, or dealing with those who are mired in fairly deep levels of ignorance and fear and doubt, and trying to help them out of their sort of morass of negativity and into, you know, the light of love and understanding. Uh, it does seem to be, for me, both drives are ongoing, and that I can't really tell the difference. And I mean, not that I spend much time trying to tell the difference, but it is a theme in the metaphysical community. So I wanted to make some comments, and you may agree or disagree. But it's a point worth discussing about, you know, considering holding it up to the light and, you know, turning it around and having a look at it. Um, and I suppose that someone will pop up and say, well, if we're all one, and, you know, in a deep metaphysical sense, we are, all sentient beings are one manifestation of the one consciousness, then you can't really be helping servicing self or servicing others, because you're just interacting with the one, the little one interacting with the big one, the little self and the big self. And the as we explore these matters, the idea of selves and units of consciousness get bigger and bigger. And a lot of people will talk about, quite sincerely, will talk about serving Gaia or attempting to align themselves with Gaia and her needs. And whether they're right or wrong, I think there are a bit of both on that. I think people's attempts at ascertaining what Gaia is or wants are completely accurate. They're inadequate, but they're a step in the right direction. And I think people that are concerning themselves with the fate of Gaia suppress their differences in order to get their agenda met. They feel that the environment, the intense environmental crisis has to be met, and even if they don't agree on what the details and the rate of collapse is, they'll suppress their differences in order to make you know, their agenda significant to the world at large. And I think we can see this when people say things like 99% of scientists believe this, and it's usually a politician that's saying it. And then the deniers on the other side seem to be quite often corporate or corporate toadies. Myself, I would not rush to distinguish between corporate toadies and environmental toadies. There's toadies on both sides, and it's a fear of having an opinion. It's a fear of being an iconoclast or actually thinking for yourself. People want to join the one club or the other, and I think this is, you know, a risky thing to do. But not that I'm offering Gord's solution to environmental degradation. I'm not. And I can't claim to have one in any way. But certainly we should get all that plastic out of the ocean. No question about that. But there's certain things that are pretty darned obvious, and then there's others that are, you know, well, shall we rush to do this or shall we not? And I just observe the groupthink, where people are too fearful to stand up for what they really think, and they will join the one team or the other team and suppress their individual differences because the issue seems so overwhelmingly important. And it reminds me of, you know, environmentalists always remind me of hellfire preachers. You know, do it our way or go to hell, and or do it our way or go into complete environmental collapse in some apocalyptic disaster scenario where we're all starving to death in the desert. To me, that's just a different metaphor for, hellfire and damnation. And I've said it many times, and I'm always surprised more people can't see it. It seems like preternaturally obvious to me. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Um, I want to make the point of um, not thinking for yourself, joining a club because it's easier, less stressful, and you gain more acceptance. Um, and for what we're doing in this out of body travel and exploring all the facets of that, um, that's not really an option. You can keep quiet about what you discover and share it only with, you know, similarly minded colleagues and friends. You don't have to be shouting it out from your front porch. Um, but you have to sort of understand that you are uh, varying from the consensus reality in quite a radical way. Although as the years go by, that may be less and less radical. And it's important to stand by your experiences and trust your senses and your experience. Um, because it's very easy to slip into the mode where if it's only a partial lucid dream, let's say, that you will deny it and you will allow your brain to put it on more acceptable tracks or psychologize it and see you're compensating for certain, lacks in your own psyche. Classic psychologist maneuver, compensatory action. Um, Trust your own experience, even the small shards of it that are actually in consciousness. By trusting them, you will give them a little more strength, and those shards will become into bigger sections, and the bigger sections will then become a whole over a period of exploration. I could say a period of time, but we all know what delusion that is. Um, One of my email correspondents has asked about exploring the self that exists between incarnations. And this has come up a lot in the regression work of the last, well, I don't know, 30 years, I'd say. Past life regression used just to focus on past lives, occasionally on the possibility of future lives. But at a certain point, I'd say the late 80s, I can't exactly remember, we started to have people recalling the between life state and, doing the life review and talking to guides and, you know, uh, going over things in the life review and deciding what had been a bit of a failure and what had been a success, and how they looked at themselves and how they might plan for the next one. And as the years went by, more and more books came out, and websites, of course, there was this sense, and that we were a complete being between lives. We weren't just person A in 1850 and person B in 1940. That there was a being that was beyond both of those manifestations. And more recently, we've seen regressies talking about bringing through only a certain percentage of your total being. And the implication being younger souls seem to take, as much as 70% of their total being. And whereas older souls with more confidence and experience would only take somewhere between 15 and 30, to give some rough estimates there. And all of that begged the question as to what the other percentage of your total being did and how it manifested in the spirit worlds while you were down here having your trying experiences, your challenging experiences. And I've thought about exploring that many times. I'm not sure if you're ready for that or interested, but one person has certainly expressed an interest in exploring that consciously. And like many of these abstruse metaphysical questions, I'm sure I and you deep down know the answer. We have to just plumb the depths and come across that answer, like looking for rare sea creatures at the bottom of the sea. I'm sure you've all seen the various nature films where the most incredibly beautiful and delicately colored fish are way at the bottom. And I certainly was impressed with that. But it's, as a metaphor, you know, it works. So the question for me would be right now, how does one distinguish, if one can do so at all, between the self that exists between incarnations, or while incarnations are going on, that 70% that's not being used, is that an aspect of the higher self or the higher self? My guess is that it's an aspect of the higher self. Because I believe the higher self is even more greater than that. And certainly the channeled books by Alice A. Bailey touch on such abstruse matters. And they are so delicately esoteric and deep. I've refrained from quoting them over much in these talks because, they are, you sense that they're incredibly meaningful and hold many secrets within the actual text. And all you have to do is sort of meditate on the text and it will come to you. But I'm not sure they're quite, I might find parts that are appropriate to read to you here, but so far I haven't come across any, but I certainly would recommend them if you wish to read them. The first one in the series, done in 1922, is called Initiation, Human and Solar. And that's a nice little kind of 300-page book that you can sachet into and get something out of. Some of the later ones are large. There's about 20 in all. I'm just throwing out a quick estimate. Some of which are 700, 800, 900 pages long, so be warned. But the first one's easier to assimilate. So I'm going to do a little exploration here, although, well, I'm sure I've done others, but they have not been brought to consciousness. I suspect that all of these talks that I've been giving so far have not gone much farther than examining the tip of the iceberg. But you have to start somewhere. So projection. Bear with me as I get into gear here. Let me recap some of the many points that I made in More Adventures in Eternity, the book from 2006 that I certainly would recommend that you read. And these series of talks, if they do become a text at some point, will be, a sequel to that book in some way. I talked about using the HemiSync tapes from the Monroe Institute and following along with Bruce Moen's autobiographical books describing his explorations and through the Monroe Institute programs, so which he describes in great detail, I might add, and some of which I have read on the More Adventures, sorry, not More Adventures, in my video series, Average Folks in the Afterlife. You'll find them there, discuss them quite a bit in detail. And I've discussed it here too, especially the famous retrieval from Brannigan's. That will get out in history. So one of the elements in the Monroe courses, or teachings if you like, is exploring Focus 27, that area beyond the belief system territories, like that area where you're not particularly a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a German or a Texan or an Australian or whatever, but are just a free human being exploring your greater potential, to create a place on Focus 27 using your imaginative capabilities. And Bruce created something for himself, and I did too, listening at my own pace to the tapes. But the thing that I seemed to create seemed to sort of exist already, that I'd created it between lives some time ago. And when I say time, God knows what I mean by time, but it was between which incarnation and which incarnation, because, when I was alive in the 1500s and then I passed, did I create it then, or was it between the next life and the next life? It's a toughie, and to answer that question, because when you're that astral being between lives, you're not really a part of linear history. You're on the spirit planes, and you're part of eternity. So trying to sort of place one in terms of the other, I think you'll find is quite the challenge, and maybe you'll just give up on it and not bother. And frankly, I wouldn't blame you. So that's what I discovered. And to get the details, you'd have to go back to More Adventures in Eternity, which I suppose I'm going to wind up reading from at some point, because I keep referring to it, don't I? So I found that I had created at some point, or the I that exists between lives, as opposed to the I that's talking to you now, and how similar they are, I wouldn't care to say, not at the moment anyway. And it's a cottage in a forest, or at the edge of a forest, and it's a fairly standard thatch cottage of Southern English vintage, and rather, well, quaint and cute as they all are, the sort of thing you'd see in calendar shots and stuff. And it's slightly larger, and it looks like that from the front, and it's surrounded by gardens, a little wild, lots of rose arbors and different things, and windy paths, and sort of thing that I love. And the back of the cottage, which you can't see from standing in the front, is like the wing of the miniature wing of a French chateau. And it's a little grander, but it's not high, so you can't see it from the front of the cottage. And it goes, like the cottage back. And it's in a rectangular room with lovely opening French windows, doors onto little patios and whatnot. And a little more formal, as befits that era and that time and that grandeur. And it's used mainly for get-togethers, talks, and small chamber concerts. And some of that is described in More Adventures. And I think when the eye that I'm referring to was putting it together, it was charmed by the distinction between the two sections, you know. And as I say, you approach the cottage from the front, you can't see the back section because it's quite elaborate and a long rectangle, but it's not high. So it doesn't, when I say French, I don't think of miniaturized, a miniaturized wing. That's really what it is. So the two styles are there. And I visited it quite a bit in that time period of writing that book and using the hemisync tapes regularly and exploring what they showed me, which was a lot. They were a great key to the mysteries. And of course, reading Bruce Moen helped a lot too. And I've never stopped giving thanks for that to Bruce and to the hemisync tapes and those Robert Monroe and his pals that put that together many years ago. So we're going there now, and I've already projected, and part of me's there. And see, that's interesting because I'm projecting a part of myself there while I sit here and talk, and the part that I'm going to meet is a part of me that's there that didn't come into incarnation. So an interesting sort of comparison of metaphors there. I have one recollection of strong recollection of meeting this astral Gordon, if you like, we'll call him that for just a second, although I don't think he's really Gordon. One time when I was meditating on an issue arising from a distance healing situation. I do quite a bit of distance healing for various clients. Over the years, I've done quite a bit. And I was puzzling over a certain issue, and I thought, I'll go to the cottage and meditate on it there. I mean, I didn't really think about it. I just sort of did it. You know, there's a lot of things you do that you barely think about. You just, there you are doing it. And I was much surprised to meet a replica of myself standing in front of the cottage, sort of bemusedly smiling. And it was as if I'd put a mirror right in front of myself. And this mirror image of who I was physically at that time, it's about 10 years ago, fairly similar to who I am now. And I was, shocked, and I could see that I was being challenged, and tried to, cope with the situation by not going, oh my God, I'm talking to myself. And I mean, I understood in a metaphysical way, you are talking to yourself, but on a sort of a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis, it's maybe not what you want to think about. And this being opposite me, looking just like me, suggested fairly quickly a solution or an approach that resolved the issue that I was faced with at the time, and which I can't remember now. But I remember at the time thinking, oh, that's a good idea. So I'm back at the cottage now, in front of it, where I was before. And here's my mirror image coming out the door, sort of closing it behind him and saying, I was expecting you here any moment. And I said, well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised to see that or hear that. And he chuckles And I said, we're doing this for the benefit of everyone else and not just the me that has just projected. And he goes, I understand that. We're on board with that one. And he then changes his appearance. And let's say he morphs into different shapes and looks, similarly to how it would be handled in an animated film. He becomes, in fairly rapid succession, matter of seconds, different human beings, different genders. Well, obviously there's only two, male, female, and they remind me of the various past lives that I have explored, fairly in detail in You Are History, which I certainly recommend more of you should read that. So yeah, I'm sort of getting this impression. He's sort of saying, okay, at various times I was these people, these human beings in history, having their unique experience. And when I've visited Higher Self, either for the writing of that book years ago, or just as a little social call, when you go to Higher Self, you enter, a large being that you can interpret in many ways. You can give it any form you want or any form it cares to give you. But you will see the completed being of that incarnation, of any number of past incarnations that are resident in Higher Self. Sort of like on one level, they're like people in a hotel room, and on another level, they're kind of like a digital file that comes to life. And I know that's confusing, but explore it yourself and you'll see how challenging it is. They are real because I say their digital files come to life, or beings in hotel rooms. That's not to diminish their reality, not at all. And there's so much certainly on the higher reaches of the spirit world that are so dramatically weird by our physical plane standards, that you describe certain things and people just can hardly bring themselves to believe it unless you have experienced a little bit of it in your own explorations. So anyway, he's going through these transformations. As I say, it's very like watching a being morphing into different shapes in an animated movie. And I'm going, yes, okay, I understand. This is part of who you are, your ability to be all these beings at different times and places. And he's sort of telling me by example, I am all of these and yet I am none of these, as are you. And I mean, of course, eventually he goes back to the guy that looks just like me and smiles and says, what does he say? Have I made my point? And I say, yes, you have. And he's showing me how, this is an inner mental thing. It's like a telepathic set of images that he's projecting to me or sharing with me. I'm not seeing this in front of me with eyes. I'm seeing it with inner vision. His ability, this astral being, this spirit being, of which, maybe I'm 30% of or something. He's showing me how he can do several things at once as a being of his choosing. He can enter. This reminds me of the experience in More Adventures of Eternity, where I saw myself as four different orbs doing four different things on different levels of spirit. So he says, yes, I'm giving you a further example of that splitting of consciousness. One of the 4 or 5 aspects that he's showing me is uh, uh, in the process of an intimate sexual relationship with another spirit being that I sort of recognize, a female, or it appears to be female, and just sexual intimacy with great sort of passion. And obviously, excuse me, another soul with whom I'm very close, or that aspect of me is very close. And then a second projection of that being is wandering around casually in the one of the lower astral realms, a sort of decayed urban ghetto, where I've blogged on this. People who die homeless on city streets will often wind up in this place, and partly because they don't know they're dead, and partly because that's their comfort zone, and they pass out from the cold or whatever, an illness, and it's a part of the astral plane that's set up to look like some people call it the homeless city, and there's more than one of them, of course. And you wander around. Well, I do, looking for potential rescues, people that are paranoid or timid from years of a harsh life and booze and drugs, and need a lot of help, and don't often take that help. But anyway, we sort of wander around and look for them, and they're often like passed out in a corner up against a wall or something. And it's a very convincing environment. It looks exactly like you think it would look. And as I said before, there's little hole in the wall cafes and soup kitchens that you can take them to that are run by helpers from higher up on the astral level, but convincingly done so that the people you bring are comfortable there. And they get a bowl of soup and some bread or whatever. And so the second part's doing that. The third part is what's he doing? The third part is a woman, female musician, singing and playing a keyboard with a small group in an astral plane club. I always wanted to be a singer. No wonder I keep wanting to sing. And often I want to sing along with female singers, on record. People like Judy Collins and Sandy Denny, and that type of singer, folky type singer. And I've often wondered what the source of that is. Whereas other fellows might want to sing along with, Mick Jagger or John Lennon or David Bowie. And I mean, I do, but I've always had a special love for trying to sing along with pure-voiced sopranos, and I can't do it, of course, but I keep trying. So anyway, the third part's doing that, and I'm being shown that, and sort of passing along to the next thing, and part number 4 is What's he doing? He's giving a talk, or he appears to be, and he's in an atmosphere that's very like a church hall, in a Christian church somewhere, and he's talking about traveling the dimensions as a free being rather than one that is encrusted with a belief system that prevents traveling between dimensions. He's trying to show how that limits one. And his audience is receptive, and he's been there more than once, kind of a regular speaker. And they're a little on the timid side, but they're certainly open-minded. And he does not go out of his way to critique their religion in any way. He just speaks of belief systems and how they can limit you. And he's talking about going to various levels in spirit rather than just staying on the one that you're on. And he also talks briefly about exploring your past lives, and much in the same way as you might talk about it here on the physical plane. And okay, I think that's enough of that. And there's another part where we're at number 5 here, who seems to be functioning as a counselor. And again, it's an aspect of that astral plane Gordon, and a little more conventional looking than the Gordon you see in front of you. Shorter hair and a jacket and tie, and he's behind a desk and he's talking quietly to a client that's on a couch in front of him. And it's sort of like astral plane psychotherapy. And as the client's talking about his issues, and this astral plane Gordon's listening intently, I see how psychotherapy functions on the astral plane, and I'm reminded by this vision that people come to the astral plane with a lot of their difficulties and issues unresolved. Just because you lived 70 or 80 years and then pass on doesn't mean that you've resolved your issues. Many of them are outstanding, and they're attached to that current life personality, and kind of need to be resolved before you can sort of graduate and go on to your next life, as it were. So I see there's quite a need for what we would call, astral plane psychotherapy when you're on the astral plane. And maybe I knew this. Well, actually, I did know it because a psychotherapist in another part of the world, as a client, asked me to channel a mentor that had passed on to assist with various clients in her caseload, with whom she felt very challenged. So I did know that then. Channeled this deceased psychotherapist who was functioning on the astral plane, and not thinking that part of Gordon might be doing the same thing. Although given the counseling, kind of psychic type counseling, that I do here on Earth right now, obviously from time to time, I shouldn't be surprised that another aspect of astral plane Gordon would be doing that there. I just didn't think of it. So there's, what's he showing me? That's 5 different versions of himself that he's showing. And he's telling me these beings are all independently functioning consciousnesses, although they are projections from him. And he's saying practiced projections, He's sort of saying, he's implying a long-term practice of this sort of behavior. And he's also saying, I can do more, but that's what I'm giving you right now. And he's using the example of the woman musician, and he's saying she knows that she's a part of a bigger self, that of whom I am the originator, let's say, and she understands that and accepts it, but yet has complete independence on what she chooses to do or not do from moment to moment. In no way do I, he's saying, no, in no way do I control her life. He's giving me the example of a child who has graduated from college and gotten into a career and has their own home. He said, you just let them be and allow them to explore the potentials of astral plane life in any way that they see fit. He says it's a rough comparison, but he says it works, and I see his point. So I'm just getting the information that all these beings have their own lives and their own dwellings and their own activities and their own preferences, etc., etc. But they do seem to be astral beings as opposed to physical plane beings. They are not dead people exploring their astral lives, as far as I can tell. Let me just ponder on that a little more deeply. Yes, I'm getting a yes on that they are astral beings. And he said, he's sort of saying, don't forget, I'm an astral being. I only send part of myself down into incarnation. And he's sort of saying, you, Gordon, are only about 25% of me, or something like that, maybe even less, 20. And so he's just sort of emphasizing his capabilities here. And obviously, it's not just quote unquote him. There are many beings and spirits that don't fully incarnate and have lots of energy and consciousness left over to do explore other avenues. So again, we're left with this ever diminishing notion of the individual and their sort of small contribution to the big picture. That's what I find, that the more you explore, the smaller you see yourself as, because you see the bigger and bigger picture. Now your capabilities expand, but your actual sense of who you are in the giant scheme of things contracts. You seem to get smaller and smaller. And maybe that's the deflating of the ego. Maybe you could see it that way. Yeah, I suppose you could. So some interesting comparisons there. And I see now that this projection that I'm describing to you now, and have been for the last 15 minutes or whatever, is actually some kind of a recap of something I did earlier tonight. Obviously, it's done now. And it went on longer than I'm describing it. I interacted with Astral Gordon on a much more, intimate level. And intimate, I don't mean sexually intimate. More interaction. And but we have a time limit here on the camera, so once again, more happened than I'm able to put into words. And I apologize for that, but currently I can't see a way around that particular issue. And So I'm sure many of you can use your imaginations on that one and see, other things that I have yet to get around to describe. But in terms of the being that exists between incarnations, uh, there is one example. And I'm even as I'm saying this now, I'm getting the feeling that when this Gordon passes in whatever 10, 20, 30 years, um, he will have an afterlife that is distinct from the being that I have just described. Related but distinct. And I hope that answers some of your questions. As I say, it's, incarnation is a mystery wrapped in an enigma. And the more you explore it, the more mysterious and enigmatic it gets. It gets more understandable, but at the same time, it gets more mysterious because there's always, two steps forward, one step back, two questions answered, another three questions opening up, and it just sort of goes on and on and on. You know, I talk about monads, higher selves being invited to populate Earth at the beginning of the Earth experiment and coming from other planetary systems and saying, okay, we'll give this a go um, because it's a unique planetary setup, Earth. And but I mean, I haven't really explored who we were before that. I've just sort of said, yeah, well, monads came from elsewhere. I suspect me with the one I'm part of, it was Sirius, but other people feel strongly as a Pleiades or, any number of other planetary systems that they have spoken of. And I'm not particularly interested in getting into a sort of, a deeper exploration of that. That seems to be, kind of beyond what we're doing right here. But it's there, and I know it's going to be explored at some point or other. So, with that in mind, the mystery wrapped in an enigma, I'll bid you farewell and move into the mysterious enigma of today. Bye.